This is a unique phenomenon in human history.
C'est une crise, comme vous l'avez dit, d'un genre très particulier parce que c'est la première fois dans l'histoire humaine que face à un danger mortel pour un certain nombre de gens, on a décidé d'arrêter l'économie.
On est dans l'instant permanent.
300,000 people can die every day from hunger.
C'est aussi aux citoyens de dire halte. Je suis surpris par l'obéissance des masses.
The importance of forming judgment, the importance of saying, I will wait to see a transcript before I comment.
Ces plaintes ont quelque chose de totalement indécent.
The coronavirus has had an impact on humanity as a whole.
Thank you, Bernard Henri Lévy and Bryan Appleyard, to agree to be the first to participate in launching Repost. I am Sophie Wiesenfeld, founder of the Hexagon Society, Franco-British pro-European think tank focused on the production and promotion of impactful cultural content in order to fight obscurantism, populism, racism, and the threat to democracy. In these uncertain times and uncharted territories, we must reinvent ourselves. That's why we decided to launch Repost, a new online and live media in which our participants will have the opportunity to hear high-value speakers and debate with them during the conference. So feel free to ask questions, raise your hands without gloves, please. Repost is a new open democratic forum. The idea came to me when talking to writers, intellectuals, journalists I am used to work with from across the channel and who were outraged by the media censorship, politically correctly called Union Sacrée. With Repost, no masks, no gloves. The word is free. Between the approvers and the plotters, there is still room for a democratic debate, a committed debate. This is Repost. All the benefits of today's talk will be donated to support the National Emergency Trust for the victims of the COVID-19. Again, thank you, Bernard Henri Lévy. I give now the word to Bryan Appleyard.
Thank you very much, Sophie. I'm proud and delighted to be talking to Bernard Henri Lévy this evening. He's unique. He's often said to be the greatest French public intellectual. I think if you said the greatest world public intellectual, you wouldn't be far from wrong. The other thing is that he's also a great, great journalist. I think I've seen him criticized for being journalistic. This seems to me to be the highest praise in the world. But I wouldn't I? And he goes out there, he finds out stuff, and he does things. That is, he's not just a pundit. He actually goes on the ground to see things. And this I've always admired about him. We find ourselves in the midst of a crisis for a generation that feels it hasn't seen crises. I mean, a generation born after the Second World War. But in fact, we have seen these crises in the past, haven't we? There's been other pandemics in the period after the 1945.
Of course, and even in our lifetime, at least for you and me, there was a very similar pandemic just after the events of 1968. From the fall of 68 till the beginning of 70, there was what was called the flu of Hong Kong, and which was a huge pandemic with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dead all over the world, with situation very comparable to what we see today. Hospitals overwhelmed by the dead, doctors and nurses coming on the front line with so great difficulty to confront the tragedy. Before that, 10 years before, I was a kid. In 1958, the flu, Asiatic flu, even worse, with a terrible moment. What is very strange is that nobody remembers them, first of all. They have been erased, both of them, from our archive and from our memory. Yeah. And what is interesting also is that when you go, nevertheless, in the few archives which remain of that, the behavior of the people of this time was very different. No confinement, no shutdown of the economies of the world. Of course, some a big deal of interest, and even more. It was already a tragedy, but which did not repel into nothingness the other news of this time. I went into the newspapers of '69. You had still in the TV news reports about the war in Vietnam, about events in France, about the end of Charles de Gaulle, and so on and so on. So we had that with very different behavior.
Yeah.
So of course the question is why? What changed?
Exactly. Well, I mean, if and we've not mentioned AIDS, of course, which was 25 million dead or something of those, that's low, but a slightly different type of illness. But I think what changed was the level of, which could be a good thing or a bad thing. So media interest is one thing, and another thing is people's overwhelming sense of what's happening in the world as if it were personal. I mean, produced by 24-hour news and that sort of thing. Do you regard this change as a good thing or a bad thing?
There is, both are true. What is a good thing and even a great thing, a huge progress in civilization, is that today each death matters, that each life is precious, is that we feel concerned and we feel, all of us, the duty to prefer life than economy. This is a unique phenomenon in human history. The fact that civilization in the West and in the rest of the world, in the developed countries, in the emerging countries, prefer life than economy, this is great news. What is less great news is that in the new regime, in the new way of working of the medias, due to it, there is another reaction. There is a sort of panic. And one of the effects of this panic is that if you look at the news on CNN, on BBC, or whatever, there is nothing left for what happens in Russia, what happens in the rise of the progress of the Chinese power, in what happens, no room for what happens to the Kurds, to the migrants trying to expelled from Turkey and who arrive on the Greek coast, and so on. So what is very strange and which is not good news is this overwhelming flood of news which properly eradicates all other possible news. And this, for the bad guys, for the dictators, for Putin, for Xi Jinping, for Erdogan, for Orban, this is great news for them because, of course, they can push their agenda very quietly. And an event which would have created the headlines today would happen unnoticed.
This is an almost intolerable clash here, isn't it? Between a conflict between, yes, we're more humane, we care about all these deaths. On the other hand, we're distracted by them to the point which may be dangerous, which may be a threat to our freedom. This is almost unresolvable, isn't it? It's agonizing.
Of course, it is tragic when you have a conflict which is impossible to solve. It is the definition of tragedy. Nevertheless, we can try. If I were, for example, responsible of a TV channel, probably I would recommend the staff, the journalists of this TV channel to devote a part of their news to what is happening in Afghanistan, what is happening in Yemen, and so on. You can do that. In France, we have magazines, and they do it, by the way. I will myself I continue to publish in a magazine called Paris Match my remote reportage, telling about terrible stories which happen in the age of coronavirus. And I thank Paris Match, by the way. They are running a piece of mine in 1 week about Bangladesh, one of the poorest countries in the world, which is affected by so many plagues and so many disasters. Thanks to Match, there will be a little portion of attention still on them. We can do some things like that. We can continue to alert to, and especially people like you, who are pundits of the big newspapers, of the Times, of Le Monde. We can try that.
Yeah. The overwhelming feeling I get is that people are stunned, absolutely stunned by this. I mean, people can't quite believe that the government has told us to stay inside, can't quite believe that the police will stop us if we don't go for a normal walk or something. So people are stunned, and there's a kind of psychological issue here, which is that how far they are adjusting to this climate. And there's a lot of people say, look, we're overreacting. Now, in a sense, the point about the previous pandemics, would suggest we are overreacting because we sort of lived with those. So it's very difficult to get people's attention for a balanced coverage, which is potentially dangerous, I think, because people could either behave very badly or they could do the wrong thing and so on, or become irresponsible. So it seems to me, this is just a social level, how we go on from here. And there's a lot of talk of relaxing the things, but then the death rates will rise. We're obsessed with the death rates. That's a very important thing. We can't take our eyes off them, understandably. So do you feel that there's something more we could say to people? I mean, one thing I feel strongly watching the television coverage is there's scientists and so on, and there's politicians, but there's no middlemen. There's no men in the middle being wise. Once it would have been filled by rabbis and priests and so on. There's no men in the middle being wise.
You have priests and rabbis, but in empty churches and empty synagogues.
Exactly.
And by the way, for me, this image of Pope Francois preaching on the day of Easter in an empty Saint-Pierre by teleconference, a few decades after Jean-Paul II having told, don't be afraid, don't fear. This was the message. This is another change of the period. 30 years ago, Jean-Paul II said, don't be afraid.
To the Poles.
Today,
he said that to the Poles,
Of course. Yeah. Today, we are living, and even the church, in this state of total fear. Same for synagogues, same everywhere. So this is the change. By the way, if you look at the history of leprosy, you had in the Judeo-Christian tradition a tradition of embracing the victims of leprosy. I remember in 1959 or 56, General de Gaulle, going for a travel in overseas department of France, his car was stopped by a group of victims of leprosy. He walked down, he embraced some of them, he shook hands with the member of the group, and he went. So this idea of confinement, this idea of illness considered as being a sort of a curse is rather new. And why is that? And why are we stunned, as you say? Probably for a metaphysical reason.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things which happened to us in the last 20, 30, 50 years is that we repressed the question, the presence, and even the enigma of the evil.
Yeah.
The evil, the fact that there is in life, in human condition, a part which is illiquidable, something which we have to fight, which we have to resist, but which cannot be eradicated from the human condition. We repress this idea. And when it comes back in the form of a little virus, all our workings are broken. All our mental patterns are destroyed. We were accustomed to the idea that modern humanity got rid of the evil, and in particular viruses. What is a virus? The strange relationship between virus, life, and death. Is it a living particle? Is it death? Is it death infecting? There was in the past time, even recently, a whole reflection about that.
Yeah.
All this has been forgotten, repressed and sent in the cloud of nothingness. When it comes back with a terrible violence.
Well, that suggests we have a problem with nature. In the late 60s, after the success of the polio vaccine, after the success with the enormous success of antibiotics and occasional success with viruses, people became very confident that we'd solve the problem of infection. And as if, but in fact, the world is an infectious place. It's how life works. I think that's not sunk in. Still, there's a resistance to the idea that the doctors can't fix everything, that somehow we will fix everything and become immortal or something. And that's still with us. Makes us weak in these situations.
Absolutely. And there was a tendency to mix, to confound, to politics and clinics. Politics was more and more reduced to clinics. And what happens today, by the way, is that the doctors take power, as you see, everywhere. In many places, they are not only advising, they are not only giving their wisdom, but they are really sometimes a little less since a few days taking decisions. And this in spite of the fact that themselves, they don't know. Themselves, the best of them know that the truth, the medical knowledge is a real path in darkness with some rays of light sometimes at the end, but not always, that it can change conviction. When you know a little of history of science, you know that science is not an authority which has the power of get rid of evilness, of darkness, of the cursed part of human life. So all this wisdom which we had before, probably we tended to lose it in the last time, and it comes at the return of the repressed.
But who's going, if we need, I spoke about a middleman who might have been a priest or a rabbi, we need somebody to say that to us, don't we? We need somebody to say, this is life, this is how we have to deal with it. Personally elect you, but if there needs to be some sort of rhetoric of explanation of life. Is one of the things that interests me is the way we talk about death now. We always talk about death as a celebration of the life of this man. Well, that seems to be rather shallow. And we need to have some sort of way of talking about the vicissitudes of life, the contingencies of life, which we don't have because we think we've got this superstition that it can all be fixed.
Death was already the big taboo of our time, much more than anything else. And we are arriving in a way at the end of this process with these unattended funerals, with these poor deads to whom we cannot even say a last goodbye, who are put in not even always in coffins, as you see sometimes in some days in New York. This is the end of the process, and it is heartbreaking. This relationship to death, which we are living today, and which is the result of a long process.
Yeah, there was a very good book by a British journalist in the 60s which said that death to us is what sex was to the Victorians, something that had to be concealed and hidden away, which it seems we are.
One just last word, in your sense. I had a friend who is now dead, a great Christian priest called Léon Burdin. I made the preface of one of his books about the death. And he said one thing in this book 20 years ago, which struck me so much. He was the man who went in one of the biggest hospitals in Paris to give the last words to the dying people, to the agonizing.
Yeah.
He was the last one to come in the room and to give the last word. And he noticed, he said in this book that more and more families invited him to give the last sacred gesture, but they said, please, try that he does not notices. Do it, say the words, say the prayers, but the dying one, the cherished and dying one, has not to know. It has to be without his knowledge. It has to be, he has to die in his own back. I was very struck by that. This man, he was accompanying, he was escorting dying people. And this moment, which is so important in our lives, the moment of the death, the most secret moment of our life, not a sacred one, but a very important one, there was a tendency to deprive us from living this moment.
Yeah.
And we are arriving at the end of this curve with what is happening today with the deaths of the COVID-19.
Yeah, indeed. Can I sort of come to a less elevated subject, which is the media in this situation? I mean, I know you've spoken about the spectocrats of 24-hour news and the world of the spectacle in which we now live, and the world of taking offense reflexively, all the time taking offense, all the time judging from the internet, but also from 24-hour news. This seems to me to be a very difficult problem. I mean, in one sense, you could say our intense sensitivity to what's happening now is the product of the media, and therefore you may say it's a good thing. We care about people's lives. On the other hand, we can't really think because of this. As you say, we don't talk about the other things going on in the world anymore. So, I mean, is the media, I mean, when I say the media, I mean the traditional media, but also the internet. It's a one-way street. We're getting more like that, aren't we? Is this a problem that can be resolved?
I hope it is not a one-way street. No, I hope not. I hope more and more people will understand that. Number one, what you said, nobody speaks about Ukraine. Nobody speaks about the migrants. Nobody speaks about the violation of human rights all over the world. Nobody speaks about the hundreds of thousands who die from hunger, for example, number one. Number two, these medias, we are more and more aware of that, are the stage of increasing number of plot theories. Medias are this also. We are overwhelmed, not only on the internet, also sometimes in the regular medias, of conspiracy theories, giving crazy explanation about all that. And number three, there is a terrible tendency today, which the new and old medias encourage, which is to judge, as you say, to do as if there was a message in the virus.
Yeah.
I cannot hear that more. A message that it is the revenge of the nature, that it is a message sent by the anti-globalization God, that it is a message that we committed some mistakes or some faults, that we are guilty of something and that we are punished. The medias are full of this punitive, moralistic narrative. And this is unbearable because we know, number one, that people who suffer, they have to be helped, first of all, but to be left with their sorrow, with their tears, not to be overwhelmed by some political agendas, number one. And number two, the scientists, one of the little things that they know is that a virus is just stupid. There is no intelligence in a virus. A virus is not the armed hand of I don't know who. And you have this tendency on the right and on the left, by the way. When you listen to the neo-evangelical, some of them, churches in America, they convey this message, that the virus is the agent of the devil, that whatever. And when you listen to some of the ecologists or some of the anti-globalization ideologues, same. They say that we made so many mistakes that we had to have at the point a warning and that the virus is a warning. So all of this is fueled by a big number of medias. And we have to pay attention to that and to correct it. And more journalists are aware of it.
Well, the journalists, I've noticed on television interviews in Britain that journalists are desperately trying to find an angle. In fact, I think there's too much coverage by political journalists of this, because political journalists are always looking for the angle that shows somebody's wrong or shows somebody's right, and so on. And I noticed a lot of journalists are sort of questioning politicians on the basis that don't you think it was his fault or their fault or somebody's fault. In a way, that's a kind of secular version of saying it's all God's fault. You know, it's somebody else's fault. The virus is poetically almost at the core of this, because there's a disagreement on whether the virus is a living thing or not. I mean, basically, it's just a package of RNA, the RNA viruses. And it doesn't do anything except deliver its RNA. So it sort of reproduces itself, but that's it. And there's a confusion about these things being anything other than they are, which is, of course, they're part of nature, but they're not motivated. They're not driven by anything except reproduction and survival. And, you know, I do think that the political blame game is part of that same superstition. You know, you can't say that Macron did that wrong, Boris did that wrong, and so on. We're all going down the same road. So, you know, you just say we try to fix it as best we can. Anyway, that's my impression. Do you get that feeling?
You are right. There is a magical way of thinking about all of that.
Yeah.
Which means a religious way of thinking it, which goes against science, against resilience, and against just common sense. We are full of that. And sometimes when I look, it's not only sometimes the politician, but also other people. When I listen to all this bullshit, I have only one will. I would love to be in front of them and to tell them, hands off.
Yeah.
Hands off the wounded, hands off the ill, hands off the tragedy with the families are living. It will be time to push your agenda after that. But no, there is an instrumentalization of the situation which is terrible. Another example, honestly, a thing which is for me difficult to hear anymore is when you see the image of the blue sky, or of a new bird appearing in the garden of this one, as if there was something good in the plague, in the virus. There is that. You have some people who are at the edge of saying, at least it allows us to see the sky as it was not, to see birds who were no longer singing, to see new ducks in the river. And this also is unbearable. This way of saying that as bad as it is, there is something good as a sort of return of purity in the agenda of the virus. Yeah. The virus has no agenda. And really, we should be revolted. I am revolted, at least, by this way of expressing the situation.
You're revolted. You find it disgusting.
Of course, it is disgusting. When there are so many ways, I am an ecologist. I really believe that we have to halt the climate change.
Yeah.
I really believe that all those who are skeptical on these matters are really cretins on the climate change. But I think that equally cretins are those who say, at least the virus draws us back into a sort of wisdom which we did not want, but which is imposed to us by the fatality. All these readings of the current tragedy with glasses of secular theology are a shame. Yes, I really believe that. Another idea, for example, you can hear that so many times. The idea that at least the virus allows us to recenter, refocus on ourselves. You can hear that. You can listen. You can read that. You have some literature about the coronavirus. The main message is that at least we can refocus to the most important relationship that we can have, which is relationship with us. Honestly, I'm not sure that it is the most important relationship. I have been bred in the idea that the most important for human life is to care about the other, to socialize, to assist the most deprived of rights and so on, not to focus on ourselves. So all this moralistic glue is really the apparently shining part, in reality, dark part of this current story.
Yeah. I want to go through two further themes, and then we'll open it to questions. First of all, science. We talked about science there, and I think there's an important issue about, frequently the politicians here have been saying, we're following the science. Right. Well, the science does not exist. There are many different types of competing versions of science, and it's a question of which you choose. Science, in a Popperian sense, is a series of refutations, basically, and we can never be sure that what we've said is true. For Newton wasn't true until Einstein came along. Now, I think part of the problem is that people look to the science as if it were a thing that is fixed. Whereas what we're in here is a dynamic, changing situation in which different things might be true. Do you think there's a problem with people's understanding of science here?
I think that a lot of people, you are right, forgot what is science, which means a process, which is a constant corrected mistake. A great philosopher of science called Gaston Bachelard said that the truth was always a corrected mistake. Of course, truth exists. Of course, we have to follow the road. We have to be obsessed by the research of the truth, but it is always escaping. And we have a way today to pretend to rely on scientists as if they were God, with a sort of a self-inoculated truth, which is absurd. And they don't need that, and they don't want it. The scientists know that there is dispute among them. They know that there is a part, for example, of the virus which they don't know, and that they will probably never know. The best scientists don't believe that a virus is a sort of a black box of mystery which will be penetrated and destroyed. They know it is much more complicated, that it is, and this is the human history. And there is an hubris, an exaggeration, an overpower, not in the scientists themselves, but in the way in which some of us believe in them, which is, again, driving us to big mistakes.
Yeah. The slightly more banal issue is globalization. And you've said that people are saying this is the end of globalization, which is not, in your view, the case. But there are sort of physical changes that might take place. Apple might reconsider its supply line through China. People might say we need to do more at home. I think Macron has said that. There must be some sort of resistance to globalization arising out of this, just a practical sense of what companies do, and which would have, more than that, it would have a practical sense on how people lived.
It depends what we mean by globalization. I cannot forget that globalization allowed also billions of people on Earth to be extracted from extreme poverty. I cannot forget that if we are able today to pay attention to what is happening in Africa and in most cursed place of the planet, it is because of globalization too. So I don't want to get rid of this globalization. I don't want to see borders regaining ground in all our countries. I don't want Europe saying no to globalization and considering itself as a fortress besieged by the others, which are the migrants. I don't want that. I heard the other day a conference of the now famous French doctor, Raoult, the doctor of Marseille, who is testing the chloroquine. And he said, for example, that the French science, the French research on viruses would be much less powerful without the migrants.
Yeah.
That the refugees in France did be a lot of energy, of knowledge, of wisdom, of whatever, to the research. Are we going because we want to get rid of globalization, to get rid of them, not to take advantage of this so important circulation of knowledge and so on? So to say farewell to that, it will be without me. Now, if you mean that we should have some masks in England, in France, enough for the sanitary needs, of course. If you mean that there is sometimes for no sense to be for a single product to be composed of 100 pieces, maybe. But I would be really depressed if the balance sheet of all this story was a way back to a new Middle Age where each of us will be confined forever. To be confined now for sanitary confinement is okay.
Yeah.
It's probably necessary. I'm not a doctor. I hope they are right. But to get the habit of this confinement, to live in confined nations, no. To live in America, in confined states, opposed to each other, I think it would be a real bad idea.
Okay.
And even travels, I hope I will keep the possibility and that I will not be designed as a bad citizen if I continue to travel to Afghanistan to see what is happening to the Afghan people after the withdrawal, the retreat of Americans. I hope I will be able to go to Yemen, where I have the intention to go to see this terrible disaster of war and so on. Globalization means all of that.
Yeah.
And we cannot just say like dummies, no to globalization, stop to globalization. No, it's not this way.
Okay, Bernard, I've got quite a few questions coming for you. From Ali, he says, thank you very much for such important and timely webinar. I'd like to ask whether Mr. Lévy thinks this pandemic accelerates robotics and causes increased unemployment rate and consequent resentments of ordinary people and hence leads to fascism.
Yes, of course. It is creating apparently an unprecedented in 20th century economic crisis. And economic crisis means unemployment. Unemployment means misery, and misery can mean, hope not, but can mean some death. Yes, of course, and some human disasters, for sure.
And Raphael asked a question which I think you will agree with. Have the Occidental governments compromised themselves in locking down their citizens and lost the right to lecture the dictators on human rights?
I'm not sure to have understood that, but one thing which frightens me is that the way of dealing with the pandemic of China is presented as a pattern, as a model which should be followed by democratic societies. And this again is a terrible mistake. What happened, the way China apparently dealt with the tragedy is certainly not a model for us. The idea of tracking us, of transforming each of us after the deconfinement as a little leprosy, these places where the people of leprosy were shut down. The idea of transforming each of us as from citizen given with rights to a possible patient, to a possible ill, suspected to bear the plague, this will be a society which will turn its back to all the tradition of open society, human rights, and so on. Maybe we have to go for a moment through things like that, but consider them as normal? No. Consider that as a long-term way of dealing with society compatible with democracy? No, certainly not. And there is a very big danger. And look at what happened in America after September 11. A lot of decisions which were presented as emergency decisions, only related to the terrorist attack, at the end of the day, the origin was forgotten, and some of them remained in the new habits of the American society.
Yeah.
I hope we will not commit the same mistake with our way of reacting to the virus now.
Okay, now Michel asks, Orban has used coronavirus as an excuse to reduce even more civilian rights. Should Hungary be excluded from the European Union once and for all?
I do think that this at least should be really discussed with the Hungarian leadership, with Orban. Orban has to choose either to remain in Europe or to implement a model of society which is not compatible, matching with the political agenda of Europe. He cannot do both. If he wants to restrict liberties, civil rights, independence of justice, and so on, he has to know. And the citizens of Hungary have to know. And the followers of Orban have to know that there will be a price for that. They will have to, to go to change their alliance, to go maybe to Mr. Putin. I don't know, but they have to know that. This is the choice. You cannot remain. I reply that to Michel. You cannot remain in Europe with inflicting such an injury, an insult to European values. But this has to be said not only to Orban, it has to be said in very loud voice to the followers of Orban, those who vote for him. They have to be responsible. They have to know what is the price of their voting.
Dalia Greppi asks, what do you think about the collection of data of citizens to control movements and therefore contain the virus and freedom in the future? Will we all be more controlled?
I know that. And but number one, we were already controlled. Number two, we were controlled with our consent. Don't forget that. It is the life in which we are living since the explosion of the so-called social networks is a never-seen example of self-inflicted slavery. We really we open our doors to the big companies, to the states, by posting some images on Instagram, all of that, by giving some data when we consume and so on. So it's an old story since decades, lived with our consent, and it is aggravating now. And this crisis, like Mr. Orban did, you have some people who will take advantage of it. I hope it will become more clear today than it was before, and that the citizens of the world will say no to that. Will boycott maybe those who will not in the future oblige themselves to some safety rules, privacy principles, and so on. This is a battle which we have to wage and to win. Battle for privacy, battle for secrets. There is no democracy without privacy. There is no democracy there is no Bill of Rights, of human rights, without the right to secrecy. If you are not offered, recognized a part of secrecy, a part which cannot be violated, which you share only with your psychoanalyst, with your lawyer, with your priest, or with your cherished ones, you are a dead woman or a dead man. I really believe that. The right to secrecy is one of the founding stones of any chart of human rights. And this is what is at stake today, even more in the society in which we seem to be entering.
Now, I've got a question from Samuel that is close to your heart. Indeed, it's what we spoke of last time we met, which is Brexit. And Samuel asks, is coronavirus going to infect Brexit? Can we still afford Brexit?
I don't know, but the point is that I said before that we don't speak any longer of the migrants, We don't speak any longer at the Uyghur in China. We don't speak any longer about what is happening in Ukraine. We don't speak any longer of Brexit too. Yes, the question of Brexit, this is even incredible, by the way. This question of Brexit, which has been such a hot point for everyone in UK and in Europe and in the world, suddenly has disappeared. This is absurd and this is dangerous because, again, the discussion which is going on is very important for the sake and the future of all our democracies. So at least the discussion has to reappear. It is like the Le Fleuve Alphée, the river Alphée, this river which went down in the depth of the earth and resurrected time after. There are a lot of debates which are like in the Greek mythology, the river Alphée. Let's be careful because the worst guys take advantage of these sort of situation. And again, they push their agenda.
Milan Schroyer asks, could an implosion of the economy not cause far more suffering than not caring for human life in priority?
Of course, we have many ways to die. A lot of illness, first of all, but we can die also by implosion of, because not only of economy, economy is not just economy. Economy is the way to try, at least if there is enough women and men of goodwill, to push more equality, less injustice, and so on. Economy means that. Economy means the possibility of solidarity. Economy means means social link. If we enter in a society where even the social link is broken, where we, each of us, become like a little monad, we will die from that. We will die from loneliness. We will die from isolation. Yes. So the leaders of the world today have a terrible responsibility on their shoulders. And a lot of them, by the way, do it properly, which is, yes, to consider the two, to balance the two evils. And politics is the art, a way to choose between between various evils. Yes, of course.
There's a very closely related question to that from Marc Touzery. Do you think that the end of the lockdown policy towards COVID-19 is going to be a political fight, as we can observe in the US with governors? Now, that's a sense related to what you just said. The politicians have to weigh the two sides together. So will the lockdown then become a political issue, in which case, you know, it's a sense of judgment on each side. One side may say my judgment go that way, and one says the other. But, you know, so the science sort of gets left behind.
For the moment, there is a responsibility of all the Western leaders, including Mr. Trump, which is to respect Constitution. To respect Constitution in these terrible times. If there is not always possibility to have a calm and thorough and deep discussion, at least we have the obligation of follow the Constitution. And I hope Mr. POTUS will remember that in the next coming times.
A question from Miguel Pachuc Besha. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, I'm sorry. How do you see the world in 1 year?
I'm not sure that there will be a before. You know, this is the thing we hear a lot also. There will be a before and an after. The world will never be the same as it was, and so on. I'm not sure of that. We started this conversation with the evocation of the 68 plague, the 1958 plague, the Spanish flu, which killed 100 million of people in the world. Thankfully or disgracefully, I don't know, the world was not dramatically changed by that, because there is a lot of other reasons for the world to change. So, I don't know. The people are not like kids, enrolled, punished, and put in the right way. You know, there is this tendency also to consider us as bad kids who are going to be hit by the good masters and to be back to the right path. No, we are not like that. And peoples are not like that. And there is a lot of conflicting questions which, with legitimacy, order the life. After the virus, there will be question of misery, of inequality, of human rights, of who will the Chinese model impose itself to the rest of the world? Shall we accept, will Italy accept as a blessing and say thank you till the end of the days, the so-called gifts of China? These are real questions, also.
Well, relating to that China point, Michael Wiesenfeld asks, what are your thoughts on the involvement of China, namely what seems to have been a major cover-up of the COVID breakout, which has prevented a better approach to the issue from world leaders and organizations? Do you think once the situation is over, world leaders will retaliate against China with sanctions?
I hope so. Sanctions, I don't know how it works, but what I really hope is, number one, that it will be clear for everyone that there is a huge responsibility of China in this crisis, because they did hide the phenomenon when it started, because they did imprison or punish the Chinese whistleblowers who were trying to alert the world, because they dealt with the beginning of the plague in the ordinary way of dictators. So this has to be clear. They cannot appear only as those who bring some planes of masks to Italy or to France. Okay, they do that, but they are also those who, by their hatred of transparency, because of their relationship to truth and to lies, who created a big part of this pandemic. Number one. Number two, I hope we will still consider, with all the effects related to that there is really two models of society which are incompatible. The Mr. Xi Jinping proposes, including to the Chinese citizens, by the way, a form of society which is unacceptable for them, which is really a source of darkness for the Chinese people themselves and for us. I hope this will be clear. Yes.
Laura Rescali-Brizard, what do you think of the absence of a proper and sound reply to pandemic by EU authorities?
I think that it is exaggerated to say that. The European Bank, which is EU, and other institutions did take some decision and did implement them, which are part of the solution. All the huge economical support given to this frozen society in which the plague has projected us, it is partly because of Europe. France alone, Italy alone, Spain alone will certainly not have been able to take all these measures, not of confinement. This you can do. Confinement, every nation can do. But relief to unemployed workers, relief allowing the society to continue to work and so on. Mrs. Lagarde, the Central Bank of Europe, did a lot for that. So we cannot blame 100%, certainly not, the European institution. They did part of the job. Maybe not loud enough, maybe not with enough agreement, maybe with too many dissensions, disagreements between Orban, we are saying, and Macron, of course. That is a problem which was existing before, existing during, and which will exist after. But Europe, as itself, behaved not so badly.
I'm going to combine two questions in one because they're basically the same question, from Anonymous and from Jenny Virtanen. What will happen into populism in Europe? Will it flourish after Corona? Both questions are basically the same. What will happen to populism?
We'll see. For the moment, the populist parties as themselves do not seem to to benefit so much from the crisis. If you see France, for example, Madame Le Pen, who is the head of the biggest populist party, is apparently losing ground. If you see UK, the populist leader who is in charge, who is Johnson, is becoming apparently a little more wise. So populism, for the moment, does not seem to progress. But the risk is that the poison of populism drops itself and invades the whole society. We could be tomorrow in a society where the real populism, which is to consider us as living fortresses, will have won. We could live in a situation where the hate of the foreigners would be considered as a rule for each of us. We could enter in a world where this idea that self-focus, to focus on oneself, is the good. If all that happens, yes, populism will not need some populist parties. We will have a populism without the parties, and it will not be better. So you have three solutions. Increase of the populist parties, number one. Spreading of the populist mood all over, or reaction of the true Democrats and Republicans in France, in UK, and in America prevails and refuses this fatality of the enclosing oneself. Again, confinement. If confinement became a new way of being, if it became the new way of life, in Western countries, it would be, as a great American author said, a way of death also.
One last question, which I find particularly interesting myself. Vladislav Davidson, I would be pleased to know if Bernard sees a new wave of plague literature coming after this. Would it affect the art?
Literature, oh, that would be great. Because you are right, Mr. Davidson. Each plagues in the past has given birth to a great literature. Even plagues, apparently more, there is a great literature about sanatorium, the tuberculosis. There were great in France. We had Roland Barthes, we had René Crevel, we had a lot of, the leprosy gave birth to a great novel of Henri de Montfred, of Henri de Monterland, of Claudel. Paul Claudel, one of the greatest French poets, L'Annonce faite à Marie, the character of Violaine, the lady who embraces un lépreux and who gets ill. This is one of the masterpieces of all times. I don't see this happening for the moment. We have a little look through newspapers at the literature which is blooming out of the current plague, and I don't see for the moment the equivalent of Decameron, of Boccace, and I don't see the equivalent of Paul Claudel. So why? Maybe because of all what we said before. When you have forgotten all the metaphysical background which surrounds this question of life and death, normal and pathologic, viruses and health, these are not only technical questions, they are also philosophical questions. Yeah. If you reduce these philosophical questions to just a technical hope that all these will be like an abscess of pus, which will be clicked, and then probably you lose one of the roots of imagination which led Paul Claudel or others, or Boccace or Albert Camus, of course, to their masterpieces. For the moment, I fear that we could be disappointed.
Okay, I'll just add, in the name of my country, there was a Daniel Defoe's Journal of the Plague Year from the 17th century.
Daniel Defoe, masterpiece. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Bernard. That's it. And thank you for everybody for taking part. Sophie? over to you.
Thank you, Bernard Henri Lévy and Bryan Appleyard. This was a very thought-provoking first webinar that you accept to launch, a memorable first one, really interesting and passionate. Thank you to all of you. It was really passionate.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Bryan.
Thank you. Bye-bye.